Welcome, online viewers. This is the first of a series of vodcasts, just exploring different aspects of using things like Elvanto to serve our churches. And I'm chatting with Mikey Lynch, who's down in Tassie, a AFS worker, and also very handy with Elvanto and part of a group called New Front Door. Welcome.
Thank you very much for organising this, Mike.
No worries. Now, you have a bit of an interest in Elvanto. You've been using it for a little while.
Yeah, sure have. So I first started using Church Community Builder back as Elvanto was on the rise, and then moved across to Elvanto after a couple of years.
Yep.
In part, kind of looking at the price difference.
Sure.
Yep.
And now you're doing a bit more of that and helping other churches to think about that with New Front Door. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, totally. So New Front Door was established to be not a business, but a ministry to help churches with things like websites, Elvanto, social media, stuff like that, and also to support those within churches who are doing that. So they're not the lone person dumped with all the tech stuff, but that can kind of network together others around the country and share. I mean, things like what you guys are trying to do as well, share good knowledge so everyone benefits, rather than it's just this cool thing that the Presbyterians in Queensland do, but we can all become smarter together. So we're kind of in on similar stuff, I think, Mike. And so, yeah, as part of that, definitely being evangelists for using some kind of church management software. And from our point of view, although we're not exclusively like Elvanto only, I feel like there is a little bit of sense in the small Christian scene of Australia. If many of us are using the one thing, we can help each other better. Whereas if we each run after, a different sort of software, then some of the principles, a lot of the principles we discuss map to any software like this. But there's something kind of cool about talking exactly the same language so we can reach over and help each other as we go. So we're big believers in people using this kind of software, but using it well, because you just suffer so much if you pay the money, set it up, but set it up badly, then actually you just miss out on the benefits of it.
Fantastic. We'll come back to some of the things that New Front Door are doing, because as viewers, you might be interested in taking advantage of some of their services. But brother, we have a similar interest in kind of seeing things done well and exploring the capabilities. Particularly, I mean, there's some tech out there that really helps us see what's happening. And that's kind of what we're on about with Growing Healthier Churches, is helping people discern what God's doing in their church, that they might be watchful, and certainly giving Elvanto a bit of extra capability in being able to synthesize complicated data. Now, it does produce a bunch of pretty pictures, and one of the phrases I found myself saying lately is, let's keep the big picture in mind, not just the pretty pictures. And so I think maybe in our discussion today, just for a few minutes, it might be worth talking about what are some of the things that help us use the pretty pictures well by keeping the big picture in mind. One of the things that helps us keep the big picture in mind is letting goals drive the processes that we're setting up. And so it's not just, doing stuff because we can, it's actually doing stuff for a reason. One of the examples that comes to my mind is people categories. It's a classic, and one of the things that the Growing Healthier Churches dashboard, will show you is kind of being able to look at, newcomer information and those that are sort of considered members. And so already we're assuming that there's some basic categories that people are using, and not everyone has been using those. And so now that the pictures are available, it's like, well, actually, maybe I should think about setting up my categories well. How are you seeing people use people categories? And what are some of the traps for maybe young players here?
To be honest, one of the bits of advice that I think better than using too much people categories is just not bothering with it at all, to be honest. Granted, there's things you guys might be using it for that make it worthwhile, but that would be one thing I'd say is actually, you know what, it seems like such a great, we want to categorize people. Yeah. I guess a lot of my encouragements is to go, you know what, some of the ways you want to characterize people, the software does somewhere else. Small group members in a region, hey, groups catch that. To some extent, some aspects of newcomer stuff is captured in people flows, if you have a welcoming people flow. And so on, engaged members. Well, actually, if that's someone who attends, 4 or more of their small group per term, well, that's actually, you don't need to kind of go through separately and, click who's an engaged. Yeah. So one part of it is to go, and I guess lying behind that is whether you use people categories or not, you've got to think the way the software thinks, not the way you think in everyday conversation. So to use an example, if you come into Facebook and you think friend means what you think friend means in your everyday life, then when someone you know a little asks to be your friend on Facebook, I mean, no one does this, right? We understand, but you wouldn't go, oh, are they my friend or not? Are we acquaintances or are we friends? If I agree with being a friend on Facebook, am I committing now to having them over to my house? And it's just like, no. It's you've got to think the way the software thinks on friend, and in the same kind of way, you've got to go, why does people category exist within the software? Use it for that. And the outcome in mind is one of the things. So if I was seeing something that you guys are doing through the Data Studio plugin, and I go, I want that, well, then use people categories for that, and then build back from that point. Does that help?
Yeah, that is helpful. I think, obviously databases provide a lot of flexibility in different ways of doing things, but there are ways that are going to be more swimming with the, with the direction of the current, that are going to make it easier in the software. But it's also about thinking about, well, what do you want out of it? I think that's a really big idea. What are kind of the goals or the kind of the bigger picture that you want to discern, and then how do you set up your house to get that? And I think for people who have multiple people categories, you've got to be thinking about managing those transitions, and how are you accounting for that managing, because it gets pretty sloppy pretty quickly.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And so you've got to think through, where do other things belong? Do other things do the work? Absolutely. And you've also got to build these systems to go, I should only create as many categories as I'm able to then maintain. And this is true with custom fields. Like if someone says, oh, we should keep a track of, this, that, the other thing, how people rate with this, or how long ago they did that, or every time you create a field or a category, you've got to create the job to keep that updated. Because if you don't, as soon as that starts to get poorly updated, or like 20% of the people stay in a category they've left, or another 20% of the most important people, you never update that category because there's no system for it, then or you have a paid administrator and you get all excited in pastoral team meeting and then say, oh, administrator, can you please do this in Elvanto? And you're making them inefficient because they're spending a big chunk of their day kind of doing all this stuff. So you've got to think that all through, because it's only useful if it's up to date. It's not up to date. It's a bit like the secondary meeting room in your church hall. If it's not clean, if it's not clear, if it's not tidy, if it's not pleasant to be in, slowly those rooms often, don't they? They become storage rooms, really.
Yeah.
And they're the grim room that the secondary committee sadly, tragically has to meet in because no other room is available. But no one is wanting to host an evangelistic course in there, or no one's wanting to run a small group in there because it hasn't been maintained. And it's a bit
That might be an interesting example, because the dashboard plugin will produce really nice pictures for you, and actually hide the mess. And so the graphs are going to spool up and show you different numbers, and you're like, okay, that's great. All of a sudden, I now need to think about these decisions, but those decisions are now going to be based on graphs that might be based on faulty data. And so how are you, what's your advice perhaps for churches who have maybe set up a bunch of processes, been adding data for a long period of time, but haven't actually thought about the integrity of that data?
Yeah, I guess two things I want to say is that there is a risk we get into, which is what they call the fallacy of a sunk cost, where you go, oh, but we've been doing this for so long, we can't change it now. When it comes to using something like this kind of software, there's no shame, and there's big gains to actually admitting that things are a disaster and saying, you know what, to fix this, we've got to actually almost declare bankruptcy and give a good week or two to set it up again properly. That sounds like an overwhelming thought, but it really is worth it. So sometimes things do get to that point where you do need to sort of, on the other hand, sometimes it's okay to kind of draw a line across the past a little and go, you know what, the data before this date is compromised, and here's what we can know, but some of these other things we can't really know. Do you know what I mean? So if I was moving, say, from something like Church Community Builder or to Elvanto, or from Elvanto to Fluoro or something like that, there may be some stuff that is so hard or annoying to transition across that I'd say, hey, look, you didn't have the data before you came to this church, and so it's okay to say, oh, we've got piecemeal data from before X date. I mean, it's the same with like, the census or whatever. There's certain questions they didn't ask nationally before a certain year, so So either of those two approaches, either really putting the effort in or declaring, this before that date, it's sketchy. But then, working together with a group like New Front Door, or what do you guys call Growing Healthy Churches? Is that the kind of, with these guys through that community, with one of the Facebook groups that's about this kind of stuff. Elvanto uses Facebook group, Growing Healthy Churches Facebook group. Ask the questions. How do you use this? Why? How do you use this? Why? Or maybe you actually, if you're just disciplined enough, you can do it within your own leadership team. You just sit back and go, hang on a second, hang on. What's this for? Why? What's this for? Why? Maybe one extra thought is, I think whether it's with a Google Drive or a Dropbox or Elvanto or a Facebook page, the lie of these kind of online things is they seem so pretty and so intuitive that we feel like it just manages itself. But I think to assign the person who's like the curator of your Facebook page or your Google Drive or your, like the parish warden who's in charge of the grounds of the church property, where you go, that member of staff is in charge of this. And so before you create a new people category, you've got to ask Mike. That becomes part of the onboarding process for any new apprentice or any new, before you do this, make sure you do the training with Mike or watch the video, that kind of stuff. I think that's another thing, is building in those kind of systems and patterns. And just as you do safe ministry, just as you do, here are the keys and the code for the building, just as you do how to lead small groups well, these kind of things. So also you go, here's how we use Elvanto here, and here's how we maintain clean data. That matters, because if we have good, clean, up-to-date data, then when we have a huge question at the quarterly vision day, and we go, wouldn't it be great to know over time what engagement with our men's ministry has been like, and how that maps towards participation in small group attendance?
Yes.
You can get an answer that you can trust, rather than an answer that when you raise it, the details person in the leadership team goes, I'm not sure if this data's up, and then where are you? Yeah.
And that's great. I mean, that's what we're seeing as I'm talking with people, churches that are now using the Growing Healthier Churches platform. They're like, wow, I didn't realize you could pull out that kind of information. And so that's now helping them to think about, well, how do I set myself up well using our Elvanto system to be able to glean that data well? And then how do I make sure that data is actually, usable? Because that graph will spool up, whatever you feed it. So
it does look pretty, and that's the tricky thing, where it's a little bit like with learning original languages of the Bible. Like when you do a little bit of Greek in, second year of your MTS apprenticeship or the first year of college, you're suddenly saying, oh, all the translations are wrong because the Greek actually says this. The better you get at a language, the more, in a sense, the more chastened and humble you are. It's a bit the same with data analysis, right? Like we spit up it's like how everyone was an expert about the growth trajectory of COVID. Everyone was doing those graphs about back in like March and April. How cute. And so in the same ways, those who don't know much, we're super confident with analysing, but all of us as staff teams need to both have good data to get the best we can. But actually, I don't know how much you're finding this, Mike. Maybe you can answer it. But at what points do you find yourself saying to people, you know what, I think you're trying to read too much into this data, when variations of 5% in a church of 100 people is almost a meaningless, like you're trying to analyze things on too short a time scale or too minor a variation or with too detailed degree of kind of specification. So sometimes you go, you know what, don't get a graph on that because it won't tell you anything meaningful. You know what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, so because we're kind of giving you a health gauge that's that's measuring to the percentile. There's a danger there that will go into minutia, but you want to be looking at those health gauges in the bigger picture to say, look, if I've got a really large visitor ratio and a really small stay ratio, that's telling me a story. I don't want to argue about that, particular percentile, like is a plus or minus 3 of what, whatever. It's actually what's the bigger picture that you're looking at there. So again, I guess the two things we've had a chance to talk about today is simply, keep the bigger picture in mind, not just the pretty pictures. And so let the goals drive your processes and the way you set up Elvanto. And secondly, just making sure that your data is reliable. Two basic concepts. Now, as churches think about, setting up themselves well to use Elvanto and what it can produce well, if they'd like to sort of find out a bit more about what you guys are up to, you've got a website, you've got a podcast, what are the ways that you can help churches?
Yeah, so you can find us New Front Door on Facebook or on newfrontdoor.org, on our website, and then through that find our podcast, whatever. Um, we can either help churches in an ongoing way, set you up with a website that gets maintained, a podcast without an extra fee for the podcast, all that kind of stuff. And then within that, then over time, support you with other things as they come up. And so it's trying to create an ongoing support relationship with ministry-minded people into using technology well for the sake of ministry. So that's a great way to do it, is just to sort of sign up, very affordable, and you get this ongoing support both with all your kind of internet-based stuff like your website and whatever, as well as ongoing Q&A stuff. Or you could just actually say, hey, we need some extra support. We're chatting with the Growing Healthy Churches guys and realize we need to revise our use of something like Elvanto. And then we could come up with more like a once-off consultancy-based thing where we say, 1, 2, 3, 5 sessions to sort of work with you about how to structure and do that stuff, so that then you can come back to the Growing Healthy Churches group and go, okay, cool, we're all set up now. So now how do I get the thing that I want to get out of this or that graph? So there's 2 kind of ways we can help you out there. But I mean, it's also just a case of, I really don't want to, one of the things New Front Door is trying to create, and Growing Healthy Churches is trying to create, is the community of learning together as well. And so in that way, being a part of things like the Growing Healthy Churches Facebook group, the Elvanto users Facebook group, are really helpful too, because you get this think tank of others, and you'll often get 3 or 4 responses that'll help you see how different sized churches in different places are solving problems in a smart way. And that's really helpful as well. But yes, we'd love to help you, newfrontdoor.org, or find us on Facebook.
I love the kingdom generosity of just helping other churches and brothers and sisters think about what God's doing. It's great stuff. Thanks for being with us today.
Pleasure. Yeah.